Greetings, this is Chris Ruby, the Nostalgia Catholic, with yet another Isaac Asimov short story. And again, this is one that appears in the Saturday Evening Post, this time the May 1974 issue. Okay, so, and it does mention here Benjamin's Dream by Isaac Asimov, page 34, which is also repeated in the inner. Well, we actually get a story here, and the actual title in the table of contents is shown to be Party by Satellite by Isaac Asimov, page 34. This is therefore the third of his Benjamin Franklin dreams. So let's take a look at that. We have some artwork associated with it, which is kind of interesting. Nice blue on the pages here, just to kind of give it a distinctive look. And then, you notice the artwork. Alright, here's Benjamin Franklin on one side, wearing his glasses and his hands, and then here's this kind of thing. This is supposed to be where the rocket with all the satellite stuff that we talked about in part 2 is there. You can see some recognizable figures there. If you look at these faces, you could probably, most of them are famous world leaders from that time if you look closely. I think that the guy in the foreground talking to the lady might be Richard Nixon, who at the time this was written, and maybe even the time that the drawing was made, you know, though embroiled in Watergate scandal, had yet reached the point of resigning, so he's still a world leader as far as when that was drawn. So, and some other figures, I'm not sure who most of them are. There's somebody in there that might be, well, that might be Chairman Mao. This guy looks like Billy Graham. The guy back in here. A little bit, but I don't know. Anyway, famous people, and of course the flags of all these various nations here. They're in color, everything else is not. And then there's the rocket that's to do all this, have the satellite that's going to be launched, and have the leaders represented here. Well, that's kind of what's going on. Franklin has reappeared to Asimov, and once again they are talking to each other, and he's thinking more about, you know, this rocket and when it takes off, and maybe something else it can have besides medical information. He's thought of some more stuff. And in particular, he's saying, well, how many nations? Oh, about 160, I think. You know, he didn't, 160 nations, and they talk about that a little bit and how history's gone. So, a lot of different things that went on with that. There's some interesting comments. So, the colonies, he's talking about all these places in, like, Venezuela, Brazil. The colonies of Spain and Portugal have gained their independence then, as we did, about a century and a half ago. And did we help? We were scarcely in a position to do that, sir. Once the deed was done, however, we announced the Monroe Doctrine, declaring that the independent nations might not be reduced to subjection again. Franklin frowned. Was that the doing of Senator James Monroe of Virginia? Yes, when he served as 5th President of the United States. Franklin continued to look unhappy. He's an anti-federalist. He fought against the ratification of the Constitution. Was he a good president? So, I said. It was a quiet period. Well, we're losing ourselves in details. We were talking about the nations. And he lists some more nations and talks about a lot of African nations and South American nations and so on and so forth. So, we should have these leaders. They can either be there or basically they could be televised. But you kind of want them to be present, makes them feel important and all that, makes them more willing to be a part of what's going on and to support it. Okay, well, it was interesting here. They have a rather odd mention about state legislatures. I think we've got to take this and put it in the context. Because he says, well, see here, my friend, when just the other year, this is Franklin talking in the first couple of days of 1790, when he's going to be dead by April, so he's 80 umpty ump years old. Which, by the way, there's a place where, let's see here. Well, Franklin, so he says, you've reached it all. When you're my age, he says, you have at least reached it, I said, a little irritated at the turn of the discussion. I may not. Weirdly prophetic. So that is Benjamin Franklin, 80, 84, I guess, years old. Isaac Asimov did not make it out of his 70s, having apparently caught AIDS from a bad blood transfusion. And this is the 80s and into the early 90s, when we didn't have a cure, we didn't even have therapeutics much for it. You got it, and it was just a matter of how long we can keep you alive until we can't, which generally wasn't that long. So he didn't make it that far, so that was eerily true. But let's go on here. Your nation considered a constitution as a certain deliberate arrangement designed to omit the state legislatures. The men of the Constitutional Convention voted to leave the ratification to specially elected bodies and not to the established legislatures. You understand why, I hope. And again, the reason is because the legislatures being talked about at this point are legislatures that already existed in the various states of the under the Articles of Confederation. They had set up their own much more primitive type state governments. So that's those legislatures. It is not to say that the Constitution does not, in fact, have actual places for state legislatures, but it's a state legislature set up under the system of the Constitution. So, most of their responsibilities are, of course, only to the given state and don't go beyond. Those state legislatures do, and it's in the Constitution, read for yourself, that the state legislatures are the ones to determine, for one thing, the election process. Just thought I'd bring that up. It's in the Constitution. But when you think about it, all in all, that's only one pivotal in some ways. We've seen that recently, but ultimately very unique. It's kind of like vice president, can be pivotal when they cast a deciding vote in an absolutely split down the middle Senate by casting the deciding vote. Kind of pivotal. It's not a large role, but it can arrive in specific circumstances to be crucial. So, at any rate, so that's the state legislature. So you had these other people. It'd be interesting to look up exactly who these people were and how they were selected, so that they could kind of represent the states as units contemplating the joining under the reign of a new constitution that created a much stronger federal government. They were, in effect, ceding a certain very significant degree of power to a federal government. Not total. And in fact, I think it's really nice that in the Bill of Rights it was very clear that anything not specifically called out in the Constitution itself therefore remains in the hands of the individual states. So that's still true. But obviously, that there could be anything that now, that's at the federal level, namely the things that are specified in the Constitution, that's something to go up to the federal level. The states had to relinquish that in joining this new union under the Constitution. So, there's a lot of fascinating discussion about all this history, which I thought was really neat. James Madison, he was scribbling all through the convention. A small man, but very sharp, always standing at Thomas Jefferson's right hand. Yeah, so he did. Oh, by the way, you wouldn't have known this because you died while George Washington was still president, but Thomas Jefferson would go on to be the third president of the United States. Oh, how interesting. Okay. So you invite these people, but then he gets to the real key thing. It's like you're inviting them mostly as a show, a dog and pony show. What he really wants to get at is the people who really need to get part of this thing and have their message on there as the people who can inspire us to work together for the good of all. And he brings up, of all people, Thomas Paine. Okay, so who created the rebels? Not the leaders, not George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or who else? Or the French that came to our aid. I mean, these all helped. But, who? Samuel Adams? Well, in part. But the main work was done by a scribbler I had sent to America myself. This is Ben Franklin talking to Asimov, with a recommendation in 1774. He was an odd and not very attractive man named Thomas Paine, who had a gift for a telling phrase and a straightforward, hard-hitting style. He was the second person in the United States to understand that independence was a necessity. Sam Adams was the first. Sam Adams, however, could only work in secret, whereas in January 1776, Tom Paine exploded the mine openly when he published his pamphlet, Common Sense. That might be worth tracking down and reading. Franklin smiled. All that Sam Adams had tried to accomplish in 10 years of intrigue, Tom Paine accomplished at once. As one example of what I mean, General Washington was moved to accept independence as a goal after reading Common Sense. And if General Washington had not accepted the ideas of independence from England, how would it have been possible to fight a war through to nothing less than that? And yet, at the end of the year, when General Washington and what was left of his army were scuttling across New Jersey after their sad defeat in New York, Tom Paine came to our aid again. I remember his words in The Crisis Phase. That's another writing of his. Let me repeat them, and he repeats them. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain through sheep we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven only knows how to set a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Interesting. That man can write. Boy, he speaks to the day. So he's talking about we should try to find some contemporary writers who can kind of unite us to help fight, against the possibility of a nuclear war. There's discussion about energy and things like that. A little bit. Well, that'll come up more in another installment later on. But we finally end a little bit on the last page. Writers are human beings like others and are themselves twisted and distorted by their surroundings. Their feelings are turned towards their own interests. They feel a kinship with their own group, their own nation. Why should they be more idealistic than others? Franklin said, "My friend, you are a writer yourself, you say, but of what you write and how you write I know nothing. Please do not accept what I am about to say as applying to you personally, though in all truth it may do so. I'm not speaking of your poetasters and your logic-chopping hacks. I speak to your great writers who must, if they are great, strive for what is universal in man, since anything less is unworthy of their efforts. Can they strive for the universal and be bound to the immediate and personal? No. They will see the crisis as Tom Paine did, and they will know how to put anguish into words as he did. Do you have no Voltaire of your own time?" Voltaire, I guess, being seen in this article as kind of a French equivalent to Thomas Paine. Well, kind of anyway. "If we have," I said, "I doubt that anyone would agree on his identity. Then call on dozens," I said, "and let them combine to play the role of a single Voltaire or Paine if your times are impoverished in magnanimous and forceful minds." So, at any rate, he's thinking that should bear some thought. And it cuts off. What, in heaven's name, do you imagine they could say that would sway the ingrained prejudices of the world? That will bear some thought. And then Franklin faded away suddenly without warning. So, what were the world's writers to say? There's an interesting little addition at the end. If Franklin's visions of a brighter future America give you any ideas on how you'd like your country to celebrate its birthday, write to Benjamin Franklin, the Saturday Evening Post, address given. So, now this one very odd detail. This third segment actually has been personally the most interesting so far. I really, well, I like it. I think it's interesting. It, for some very unknown reason, did not get included into this book about the Benjamin's Dream series. It had the first two, and it'll have the fourth, which we'll get to hopefully in a little bit. But it does. The third is just not there. Where did it go? Why isn't it in here? I don't know. So, it therefore qualifies as what I call an Asimov rarity. It has never been gathered up in any book. It's in this magazine. I think I've seen a claim that maybe it's posted online somewhere, but basically, if you can find it, it's a good read. I can definitely encourage that. So, that's what I have to say for that.